Still on the election, there are a total of 21 propositions on the primary ballots this time, 11 for the Democrats, 10 for Republicans. Now, these are all non-binding propositions that are actually like a preference poll, giving party leaders an idea of how their voters feel about some major issues.
Our Brian Burns talked to party leaders in Nueces County about what you can expect.
The propositions on the Democratic side range from right to health care to immigrant rights. While on the Republican side, they range from prayer in schools to rejecting restrictions on the Second Amendment. We spoke with the chairpersons for the Democratic and Republican parties of Nueces County.
Each one of them is important to the Democratic Party. We know, locally and nationally, health care is a big issue because a lot of people want to make sure that they have access to doctors and without having a whole lot of roadblocks to be able to get the health care they need.
That's very important that we protect our Second Amendment rights. There's issues on there of bringing prayer back into school. How do people feel about putting prayer back into school?
Both chairpersons said they hope voters would look closely at each proposition and vote their conscience.
We're hoping to not only flip the Senate, because it's important that we get legislation passed that we desperately need as a country that deals with our infrastructure and us growing, but we also hope to flip the State House because we know 2020 is a big redistricting year for not only the county but the state.
There's issues on parents and sex education. Should we leave sex education to the parents at home, or is that something you want your schools to teach your children? And again, these are all, they're good questions. They need to be asked.
Both chairpersons described how these propositions will mold the local and national party platform for this year's November elections. You can examine the propositions on the Nueces County website or on our website at KIIITV.com. Brian Burns, 3 News.